Welcome to this episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host, Olga Peters. And if you are new to the show, I am speaking with regular contributor Emily Kornheiser, who is one of three representatives for the town of Brattleboro. Hello, Emily.
Good morning, Olga.
Good morning. And I want to welcome to the show for the first time, Public Defender Kelly Green. I'm so glad you could join us today.
Thank you for having me.
For those who are looking for past episodes of the Happy Hour, you can find us on iTunes as well as Spotify and our webpage, the Montpelier Happy Hour.captivate.fm. And we have lots of juicy conversations for you on those channels. Kelly, thank you for joining us today. And I would love to start, just for folks who maybe aren't familiar with the criminal justice system, what is a public defender and what brought you to the role? Like, what's your passion with this job?
So just a little bit about me. So I am 46 years old. I am a white middle class woman, and I live in Randolph, Vermont. And I'm actually pretty ordinary in every way. I could have grown up to do any number of jobs. I might have been a music teacher. I might have been a community organizer. I probably was always going to go into some type of public service of some sort. I went to law school. Mostly, I just wanted to go to graduate school and didn't really have a real plan. I might have become a history teacher, but I ended up in law school, and I ended up becoming a criminal defense attorney just because I figured I'd be maybe an environmental lawyer. I went to VLS, and but I was instantly taken by criminal law because it's very obvious right away, I think, to most people, maybe just to me, whatever, crime is fascinating. And like from my upbringing and perspective, it's like something I had never, it was just a world outside of my own world, and that I could venture into. And so that's how I became a public defender. Most criminal defense in Vermont and probably elsewhere is public defense. Most people charged with a crime can't afford to hire an attorney. It's super expensive to hire an attorney. I was like trying to maybe write a will or something for myself recently, and I'm like, I should hire someone. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to pay someone $250 an hour to do it. Like, it just seemed just like an expense I didn't want to couldn't incur. So most defense in criminal defense in Vermont is public defense. Mm-hmm. I am speaking today to you.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? So just to make it very explicit, that means that most people who are charged with crimes in Vermont don't have very much money.
That's correct.
Right? Okay.
They have to meet a means test before they're assigned a public defender. And they also have to be charged with what we consider a serious crime to qualify for a public defender. You do not get a public defender for very, very low level crimes. So I got it. If you have a little bit about my background, I'm like, I'll be a public defender. That seems like a good job for someone like me. And I've been doing it since 2005. And increasingly, I just find myself like, I can't believe where I am, because I have somehow managed to land in the darkest, cruelest, racist system imaginable. And it's like, I'm like, no, I was supposed to be an elementary school music teacher. Like, how did I end up here? And it's what, I don't know, what keeps me here is my pension. Maybe I'm lying about that, but I do love my work, my job, my clients, my colleagues, the court system. I love it. But it makes going to dinner parties in my sweet little community of Randolph really hard, because I'm sitting down with my neighbors talking about some like fabulous goat cheese that they just found at some niche farm down, in Brook. And I'm just like, wow, dealt with white supremacy all day, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Vermont, so I increasingly, it's hard because increasingly I lose track of all the things that why people love Vermont and all, because man, it's the underpinning is really, really toxic.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's so much darkness and pain. So like in all of our communities, and it's mind-boggling to me how many people are how possible it is to not see it, and how everywhere it is once we do see it. I mean, it's really just, yeah.
Vermont has designed a system so that we don't have to see it. And that's what it's for. It's like Vermont does not like noise. We do not like yelling. We do not like addiction, mental illness. We have no tolerance. We don't like Black people. We do not like any kind of mess. I had no idea. I thought we were like this, progressive paradise with values that are exceptional compared to I was living in North Carolina prior to living here. I was living in Asheville, North Carolina. But I was like, I got to get out of Buncombe County, North Carolina. I got to go back to Vermont. So,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to tell people. I hate to tell you. I hate to have to tell you, friends and neighbors, who I love. I love you all. But you've got a completely messed up system here that's keeping the veneer on your lives. But
well, that's one thing Emily and I talk about on the show a lot is, and I don't know that we've named it always explicitly, but recently I sent her an email about possible shows in the future. And one thing I've been sitting with is the Vermont brand. And I think that kind of names that veneer, and how many of us actually see ourselves in that brand. And I grew up, most of my life has been spent in Vermont, and I don't see myself in the brand.
I want to be in it. I want to be in it.
Yeah.
I want to be in it.
Okay. No.
I'm all set with what's going on around me in my day job. Like, I just want to ride a gravel bike, man.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. I think that's what I'm really sitting with right now, Kelly, that you talked about is what we don't see. And I think all three of us have jobs that probably do make us see people on their worst days and in their worst situations. And it can feel, I don't know about both of you, but for me, sometimes it just feels like I'm underwater because the pain is so deep. And how do you start bringing, how do we start bringing these things to the surface without swamping everything else?
Or why not swamp everything else? I mean, I was in a meeting. I've become more and more aware of how incredibly uncomfortable people are with making other people uncomfortable. And that's like just not, it doesn't make sense to me. And like, that's my own gift and curse and cultural heritage, but I think we need to get comfortable with making people uncomfortable, because right now we have a lot of people who are incredibly uncomfortable because they're in prison and they're experiencing violence and they're hungry because other people aren't able to be uncomfortable or make each other uncomfortable. And so, Kelly, will you tell us some about?
I'll say, Emily, I understand what you're saying, and I completely agree. When I'm talking about not swamping everything else, I'm not talking about making people uncomfortable. I'm fine with that. It's how do we bring these things to the surface? To me, it's more of a practical thing, because if no one can get their footing on dry land, how do we bring other people up onto dry land? So to me, it's more about how do we change these systems without just ending up with something worse than when we started, is more what I was thinking. Okay. But yes, Kelly, sorry about that.
No,
interrupt.
Please do. People, how do we do that? It's hard, right? Like, so,
well, talk to us about your clients, many of the clients you see, and what are some of their challenges and barriers that they're dealing with that brought them to your desk?
I was trying to think about this morning, okay? And I was trying to think to myself, it's been a long time since I've represented a person who really didn't have a significant mental illness. It's been a long damn time since I've just had an ordinary brain. I don't know what the word is you use, but just like it's been a long time since I've represented someone who isn't laboring under, coping with mental illness. Right? A long time. I have done it. I've definitely, I had a self-defense trial in 2019, and that client just was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he wasn't suffering from many of the things that other people suffer from. But mental illness is huge. It's a huge thing. It's like that's a giant challenge. And we got to solve that. I literally, I don't want to exaggerate, but it's like 90% of my clients have mental illness and addiction, and it comes back and forth. And so how do and here's the other thing. Here's the like hopeful thing about my neighbors and their dinner parties and the goat cheese. My community, I think I said Randolph. I love Randolph. My clients are really the same people as my neighbors. And they're often, and like in my town, we have at any given time 2 or 3 people who have significant, what I would call major mental illness. And they're living in my community, and my community rises to the occasion and accommodates those folks and loves them and takes care of them, right? It's only when someone steps out of line that we like bring down the criminal justice system. So most of my clients that I deal with every day are people who are living, at first living in our communities, and our communities are super good at loving those people until they step out of line and tangle with the criminal justice system. Then they disappear and we throw them away. My neighbors, I don't want to like talk too specifically because I don't want to bring attention to any particular person, but every town has someone that the town is wrapping in love and taking care of and accommodating. And like, yeah, that's the guy, with the nunchucks in the road. And the nunchucks seem scary at first, but he's just doing his thing and he doesn't harm anybody. So just like whatever, every community, but as soon as someone calls the police, and as soon as a crime occurs, that person gets sucked up into the criminal justice system. And let me say, I'm also speaking from a point perspective of, you know, the phrase, like, what is the phrase? When you're a hammer, the whole world is a nail.
Mm-hmm.
There is a whole other system where people maybe get involuntarily hospitalized or whatever. And I've never understood, like, some people end up in the criminal justice system and some people end up at the hospital, or, you know, like, it just depends on who you get and who's doing the triaging.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But I talked to a guy all week this week, a client of mine who has been in and out of prison since 2002 for kind of low-level property crimes due to his significant, really significant ADHD and his co-occurring drug addiction. This guy has been mostly in and out of prison since 2002. He can't comply with curfews. He can stay sober for a while, but then he can't. So he commits a burglary and he takes somebody's lawnmower and then he tries to sell it and he goes to jail. And like, oh my God, have you been to jail? Nothing's getting done there. He's not getting meaningful drug treatment. He's not getting any mental health care, that, very minimal. But like, oh my God, we've tortured this guy. Like, this guy has been in and out of prison I can't explain to you what that means to have someone since he's how old is he? 40 something, early 40s, but since 2002, he's been in and out of prison for these two problems.
Mm-hmm.
And we are torturing him. He's not getting better.
Right.
No.
Right.
That's what
So
we're
the
doing,
cycle.
man.
Mm-hmm. No, and I mean, all of these drug use and ADHD and depression and PTSD, like, they happen across the whole population. But when you're living in poverty, the stress exacerbates it all and like makes your illness way more public. Your ability to cope with the systems that you need to get care, way less. And so we just have this whole universe of how, like, some of us can exist with our neuroses and problems and childhood trauma, and some of us, like, it becomes too much and we wind up in a cage.
Mm-hmm. I think what I'm hearing right now is it's almost like there's this imaginary line in the sand. And on one side of the sand, we tell certain stories about community and about people who need help in that community and who belongs to that community. And then on the other line of the sand, that same person gets an entirely different story told about them and why they're on one side versus the other. And all that person has done is crossed that imaginary line in the sand. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
There's someone very close to me who is very close to someone else who currently is dealing with the criminal justice system, who has a long history of mental health challenges and cognitive impairment. And as we talk about it, she keeps on saying, I'm scared that people won't know he's a good person. Mm-hmm. Like, that where he's going, no one, like, I know that, and I know that all of his service providers knew that, but I don't think on the other side of this sand, anyone's going to know that. And what I've so appreciated, mostly when I hear from you on Twitter, Kelly, is what I know that you're holding people's whole selves while you represent them. And that's so powerful to me. For nothing else, that person gets to have that experience of someone seeing their whole self while they're dealing with the other side of the sand.
It's impossible to not do that. There's nothing special about me and this is what's so hard. When I go to court, and it's like I get a notification that a 22-year-old man has killed a toddler and he's going to be arraigned. And I walk into the courtroom and oh my gosh, like all the state police are there. The whole family of the toddler is there. They are so grief-stricken and angry and grief-stricken. And I walk into this, they're keeping this guy in the cell in the back. And I walk into the cell and he's sitting on the floor. It is a human response. That person needs me. I'm the only person there for that person. He needs me right now. It's an emergency, and we instantly bond. Like that guy needs a cup of coffee, and needs me to hold his hand while he cries. So it's a human response. I instantly bond. And then I get to know my clients. And there are days when I'm like yelling at them on the phone because I'm so aggravated and they're yelling at me on the phone. And I can see how like this got crazy. But then they send me the best apology letter, or I don't know. It's just, there's people are people, and people are easy to love. That's part of being human. You can connect. We have that in us. It's inherent in us. And I've represented some people in the state of Vermont who are infamous. And the whole world is out to get them, man. But I just want the whole world to meet them, because there's just things about them. They're, their curly hair, the way that they walk down the courthouse steps and hold on to their grandmother when no one's looking.
Mm-hmm. So we have just about 5 minutes before the break. So I just what do we want to make sure, Emily and Kelly, that before we go to break, what do we need to leave listeners with right now to help them? Because, and I ask that in part because I'm trying to imagine who might be sitting at home going, no, I don't understand this. And I can imagine there are people out there who have been hurt by others.
Absolutely.
And that might be, this conversation could be really hard for them to listen to.
Absolutely.
So yeah, let's think about that. Given that framework, what do we need to leave listeners with before we?
It's very, very clear to me that grief is universal. Everyone will experience grief. Crime victims, judges, police officers, every single human, it's a human experience. So we all have this in common. That's what I would leave before the break.
And I think on the other side of the break, I think that really brings up questions of, vengeance versus justice. And then sort of the other side of that, which is what actually, what is best for our communities.
You got it.
There's a lot of abstract philosophy on the spectrum of vengeance versus justice, but then there's the third way, which is evidence-based treatment and evidence-based practices, and how profoundly difficult it is for us to move forward with that politically, given that we're stuck in this paradigm of vengeance and justice.
Beautifully put.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Kelly. I think what always stays with me when we're talking about the criminal justice system is how difficult it is, especially if someone does, whether they want vengeance or justice. We have a criminal justice system. We use justice, but what we actually have is a law system. Justice may not actually be part of the equation in many cases. And I think that makes it hard for a lot of people too, whether they're looking for justice or vengeance. The system may not be set up to give them either in many ways. So on that happy note, the Montpelier Happy Hour is going to take a break. So hey, stay tuned. We're going to hear from some of our underwriters and be back in a moment. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. I'm loving this. I'm sitting with a lot of things, and I appreciate everything you're saying. Thank you.
It's soul crushing.
I know. I appreciate how much you're able to show up
every day.
Yeah.
Oh. Do you need a moment before we go?
Okay.
Back on air. I know I was getting weepy. Especially yeah. I tend to be a sympathetic crier. Yep.
I'm famous for crying.
Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host, Olga Peters. And if you are just joining us, I am speaking with Emily Kornheiser, one of 3 representatives for Brattleboro, and public defender Kelly Green. Thanks for being with us today, Kelly.
Thank you.
And I want to remind us that the views and opinions expressed here on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the host and the guests, not of the station or of anyone else who happens to be listening. And we are each here as individuals expressing our own individual opinions, not here as representatives of our employers.
Thank you so much for that reminder, Emily.
Anytime.
Before the break, we quickly touched on the criminal justice system as, and Emily said it so well, vengeance versus justice versus what's best for the community. And I'm wondering for you, Kelly, how does that sort of paradigm show up in the work that you do and show up for your clients?
So I can tell you that every single day I come across 5 examples of how the criminal justice system is not serving Vermont. It's not serving the community. It's expensive. It's not solving any problems.
It's not funded well enough. It's expensive and not funded well enough.
It's expensive and not funded well enough. And yeah, right. And it's just not working. And at a fundamental, well, it's hard to say. I go back and forth on this. On some level, I think it doesn't reflect Vermonters' values. Like I said earlier, when my clients are in the community, my communities rise to the occasion and love them and accommodate them. But when they step out of line, they go to the criminal justice system. So in some way, I think the criminal justice system does not reflect Vermonters' values. But more often, I think it does reflect Vermonters' values in that we have an unending appetite for white supremacy, and we have an unending appetite for law and order, and those 2 are related. So it's hard to know. It's hard for me to know. We like to think we value agriculture, but I think what we really value is crime and punishment.
I mean, and I think we think that it's people's fault if they're desperately poor. Mm-hmm. It's very noble to be poor, but to be desperately poor is desperately unacceptable.
Yeah, and it is really, really hard, super hard for people to associate someone's criminal acts with their mental health. It's really hard for us to be like, this is being, these two things are super intimately related. It's very hard for people to forgive and understand how a person's behavior came about on a particular day without blaming them. So the criminal justice system in Vermont, it's not working. It doesn't solve problems. Like I gave you an example earlier of a client who since 2002 has been mostly in jail, periodically in and out. And what's changed for him? His ADHD is still, it makes him so uncomfortable. You couldn't even talk to him because you yourself would just feel so uncomfortable. And he's poor and he has addiction that he struggles with. Criminal justice system hasn't fixed any of that for that guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I'm still sitting with something you said before the break, Kelly, about how some people end up, depending on who's triaging the system, or the situation, I should say, some people end up in the mental health care system, for better or worse, and some people end up in the criminal justice system, again, for better or worse. And I think as someone who's sitting back listening to this, what that kind of does my head in on is if we're going to put someone into, say, a certain path, if we as a community say, this is how we're going to deal with X, Y, and Z, then it kind of needs to be clearer. And if you don't even know which way you're going to go, help or incarceration, like, I don't see how that can even make working in the system clear either.
And there's a third path that people go down, which is diversion. Mm-hmm. And that it also, in my experience with clients engaged in it, was also arbitrary. And mm-hmm. I think on some level it's someone goes to diversion if they're sympathetic, and they go to the mental health system if they aren't scary. And they go into the criminal justice system if they're scary and non-sympathetic. And that is like, that's just, I mean, generally how we judge those three things is just straight implicit and explicit bias. There's like not.
That's right. I spoke to a guy this week who he was on probation in Brattleboro, and he I don't know what he did, because we didn't get into it, but he went to the Brattleboro retreat, and he was at the Brattleboro retreat receiving treatment. You got to have a serious problem if you're an inpatient admission to the retreat. And he literally got out of the retreat and went to his arraignment in the criminal court for violating his probation. Whatever he did in this crisis he had violated his probation. He literally went from his hospital room to the criminal court. And I'm like, how is that guy? Like, how do, so we're not addressing any of that. The legislature tinkers around the very, 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 very edges of the criminal justice system. And most of the time it is not to reform. Most of the time it is to become more punitive.
Let's talk about the recent good time fiasco.
Yes, for those who don't know, let's start with a definition. What is good time?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So let me back up a little bit more. Mm-hmm. In Vermont, when someone is convicted of a crime, they get a sentence, right? The judge hands out a sentence. And that person will get a minimum sentence and a maximum sentence. And then largely the Department of Corrections and the parole board decide if the person gets out at their minimum or if they have to serve all the way to their maximum. The Department of Corrections parole board decides what happens in between those dates. These sentences that we hand down are absurd. They are excessively long. They're ridiculous. They're draconian.
And there's so much evidence, both nationally and globally, that the vast majority of crimes, one, only are only committed by folks who are like under the age of 35.
Yeah, right.
And
That's
so
right.
there's like that piece of it, that like it's just this brains develop and then the danger to the community is over. But there's also that, like, if we have some absurd belief that therapeutic things are happening in our criminal justice system, there is a limit to how long that therapeutic experience would be, or how long someone needs to be removed from the situation they were in order to stop doing those things. And there's so much evidence that that's like 2 years.
Yeah, and when
Interesting.
one part of the job that I do is I interview jurors all the time. So I'll interview a jury after they're discharged. They've convicted a guy of a crime, and I go back to interview them about that process. And I'll be like, yeah, well, that guy got 35 to 50 to serve, and they're like, what? I can't believe it. They're like, we sat there and heard that testimony. That was 35 to, 30 to 50 to serve. That happened, So the legislature, so we tinker, like I said, we tinker around the edges of this. So, a number of years ago, the legislature passed a law that gave everybody an opportunity to be released from prison 6 months earlier than their minimum release date. And this was so that people could get out on furlough for 6 months, prove that they're doing okay, right? This was just really a way to cut sentences by 6 months. And that was cool. And we did that for a while. And then very recently, last year, I think, the legislature decided to end that. Not clear to me why. So there's no more 6 month window where you could possibly get out 6 months early if the Department of Corrections wanted that. So that was the first like what's going on? I thought we were all into criminal justice reform now. Where'd that go? And then this year, this is like a crazy story. So I guess, and Emily, you'll have to correct me, right? But I think last year, the legislature passed a new law that allowed offenders to earn, while they're in prison or on furlough, time off their sentences. So for every month that they behaved and followed their case plan and complied and showed that they were on board, they could cut a week off their sentences. This bill was amazing.
And this actually wasn't even a brand new idea. This is something that we used to do and stopped doing, and we're bringing back.
Absolutely, that was something that we did many years ago, and we brought it back, and it served to cut sentences. So it saves money, and it was not what I'll get to what I want, but it definitely reduced sentences, which was good. That was a good thing.
And I think the other idea behind it was that it also would put the correction system in a position where they were forced to provide more programming.
And there's also evidence that was presented about how it actually reduces recidivism. So people are less likely to commit crimes once they get out. And I don't know how that works. I'm not an expert on that stuff, but that was the expert testimony, I think, that was presented. I think that's supported by research. So that law, it was passed. Whenever it was passed, it went into effect January 1st. And wow, that was really great. People were earning time off their sentences. And then I'm so busy with my cases.
Yeah, and I'm not really exactly sure what happened, but my understanding is that a coalition of victims' families came forward and were very upset that the folks who had committed crimes that caused these families excruciating pain were not going to be getting the sentences that they were promised, that the victims were promised. And which for me is such a misunderstanding of the way this is supposed to work.
Yeah.
And we also do a terrible job of victim service and treatment and communication and remedy. And, even I think our restorative justice system at its very best doesn't do that part very well. But it's both experiences, the experience of the victim and the experience of the perpetrator, are relationships to the state. They are not relationships to each other. It is not a promise between the person who is incarcerated and the person who is a victim that they are not in relationship with each other in this system. Both are in relationship with the state. And there are never official promises made to the victim by the state in these cases ever. But victims felt that they had understood a promise that was now being broken.
Yeah, so the legislature decided just in the last month, let's say, to take back that program of earning time off your sentence for a certain category of crimes, big, terrible crimes, murder. I can't remember the list, but it's always the same. It's like murder, kidnapping, whatever, all these bad crimes. And so, now
most of the people who are in for long sentences are there for that crime. So it's a little bit like, so it sounds as if this reform change or reduction in the reform, or the closing of it sounds like it's closing a loophole for just a very specific set of people, but in fact it's almost everyone, because the folks who the original law applied to were mostly in that category.
For the community, meaning all of Vermont, to see benefit from the good time policy practice, it really does need to apply to people serving the longest sentences. So if you, and I'm really interested in saving money. That is a big, I would like us to be spending money differently. I would like to prevent crime. Right? If I had my choices as to how I would spend our money, I would like to spend it on housing, education, and mental health care. Right? So it's like, for this to really save us money so that we can redirect it and prevent crime and to have a healthy world, you need to apply this type of program to people serving the longest sentence. And also people who commit a homicide have some of the lowest recidivism rates of anybody. And so I happen to have the pleasure of knowing all of these they're old now, right? Like, there's a lot of people who committed a homicide in 1990. They're still in prison. They're very different now that they are 65 and they've been in prison all this time than they were when they were 22 and high on cocaine and desperate and killed someone. They're just very different. They're very expensive for starters. Their healthcare is expensive, and they're just not. They're slower and they're frail, super frail.
Mm-hmm.
It was really hard to give these people this credit, right, on January 1st, and then at the end of April, we took it back. Mm-hmm. And I happened to be the attorney who was in my office on call to answer phone calls from people when that happened. And I've spent a few days with people who thought that they could cut time off their sentences. It was really, really one of the cruelest things I've seen happen in a while.
Hmm. So Emily, as a lawmaker, as you're listening to Kelly, what are you sitting with right now?
So that passed on a voice vote. It wasn't a roll call.
Mm.
And a few of us voted against it in the roll call. But mostly it was something that hadn't, you know, we pass a lot of laws.
Mhm.
And it's only when they get contentious that people do their own research to figure out where they need to, you know, where they want to be, because otherwise you trust the committee of jurisdiction.
Right.
Because
Fair enough.
well, I can't learn everything about ag policy or transportation policy. Those are my two committees where I'm like, I have no idea. And occasionally I'll ask someone who knows, but mostly I will just trust that you all are taking care of the roads. And for me, it's when I see an issue like that where so few of my colleagues have their like feelers up on it, it says to me that people haven't had these opportunities right here. Or the opportunities that I've had in my work or my life in this community, or haven't, you know, visited prisons and seen the geriatric prisoners, or even understand that we can't use Medicaid to pay for healthcare for people in prison. That's just state dollars.
Right.
And so, and also, you know, I think we all have really different tolerances for looking a victim right in the face and saying, I'm really sorry, but I think this is what's best for Vermont. I'm sorry about your pain too. And the fact that we can't, like, it's really hard to hold these like multiple realities and multiple people's pains and craft a path forward from there. And we are constantly moving between these two extremes of being driven like just by feeling and idiom even, and like to evidence-based, and it there doesn't seem to be rhyme or reason for when we stick with one or the other. And I think that's true for me as well at this point. It's not, I don't have staff or time to dig into the evidence on every single issue. If I had staff, I would certainly task them with digging into the evidence on every single issue. And so I don't know if, you know, we don't, as a body, we don't all haven't had the opportunity to deeply explore what is wrong in our criminal justice system and what can be changed. And we have talked a lot about justice reinvestment, which this is not. And so it's really, I mean, it's confusing to me, the whole thing. It's confusing.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. And I want to say, like, I didn't make a huge loud fuss. I voted against it because I found out about it too late to make a fuss that would have mattered on the policy. And I tend to only make a fuss when I think it will change the outcome. But sometimes I think it's worth making a fuss because the people who are witnessing it would have appreciated that fuss being made. So I'm sorry for that, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have only scratched the surface.
And now we're all crying.
And now we're all crying. Yes.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yes, fan the face. We have just about 5 minutes before we need to leave, and I know Emily needs to get to a meeting. So I want to turn to Kelly and just say, for you, we have a lot of strings hanging out here now that this conversation has led us to. What do you feel for Vermont, for your clients, if you could change anything in the system, what for you would be the way forward?
It's very, very, very clear, crystal clear to me what I would like the legislature to do, what I'd like people to support. You absolutely have to cut sentences. You have to lower sentences. You have to bank that money you saved and spend it wisely to prevent crime.
Thank
Very
you.
simple.
Yep. I'm just, after our deep conversation, I'm sitting with like, yep, that was clear.
And I would say to Emily, walk through life as you do, understanding that grief is universal. You understand that already. Get your colleagues to all understand that. They already understand that. It's just to remember. Everybody understands that. It's a point to remember.
Yeah, right. Perhaps what we need to understand better is that grief never stays behind closed doors. And so it's something we bring to a lot of the choices we make. And
it can be a strength too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's some of what gives you your power in the courtroom, right, Kelly?
I think so.
Well, thank you, Kelly Green, public defender in Vermont. Thank you, Emily Kornheiser, representative in Vermont. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. As you can tell, we just scratched the surface, so I suspect we will be having more conversations around this topic in the future. The Montpelier Happy Hour can be heard every Friday at 2 p.m. on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, as well as Emily's YouTube channel and BCTV, and the Montpelier Happy Hour Facebook page as well. You can find us. I want to, before we leave, I want to raise a toast, because we do like to end with a toast, and say thank you to you, Kelly, for all the work that you are doing, all the thought you are bringing, and all the heart you are bringing to your job. And for everyone out there who's been touched by the criminal justice system or by crime, we just want to say we hear your pain, and we are sorry it is out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We used to record the show much later, and we would talk about cocktails, and we had a weekly cocktail. It all made much more sense back then, but now we just do it. It's coffee and tea. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you,
All right.
Emily.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And everyone, have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.